Shalom and welcome to Torah for the Nations. This is Shira Sherbo coming to you from Spot, Israel. I'm sitting inside my sukkah. Tonight is the first night of Sukkot. I wish you could be here. I was thinking maybe this is the next best thing. I just really appreciate getting to be with you and teach you, because you know how they say the teacher always learns the most. And I put together this series that I think you're going to love, and I learned so much putting it together. It's called The 7 Keys to Bonding with God. And so our sukkah that we're in is like a hug from God. And so this festival of Sukkot is 7 days, 7 nights that we spend in the sukkah. We live outside in the sukkah. And it's all about drawing close to God. And so I'm going to tell you what we get from the first night, which is tonight, what we do. We're going to do practical applications of what we learn and what we do to draw close to God, because really that's the whole purpose of our life. And I hope you're enjoying, this Middle Eastern music in our neighborhood. There's so much excitement here. The kids are off from school for like 9 days. You're going to probably hear power tools. Everybody's putting together their sukkah. Ours is pretty simple. It went up pretty quick. But what we have around our sukkah, the pictures on the sukkah, are the names and drawings of our 7 shepherds. So there's Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses and Aaron, Joseph and David. So they're called our 7 visitors, and they come every night to our sukkah. And this is how we learn to draw close to God, because every night of Sukkot, one of the 7 shepherds is featured. And that shepherd takes on one of the 7 emotional character traits of our Heavenly Father. So you think about it, how do you bond with someone? How do you draw close to someone? When fathers see their children following in their steps, these are our forefathers, and they see us following in their footsteps, because each one of them had to live for a while in exile and totally rely on God. That's why we come out of our homes, we come out of the roof over our head, so to speak, that security of having a roof over our head. The roof here in the sukkah is one where you can look up and see the stars. It's like a thatched roof. So it's symbolizing that we're putting all of our faith and our trust in God. We're bonding with Him. We're drawing close to Him. So we have these 7 shepherds of Israel that come to visit us, and each night, like the first night tonight, Abraham is featured. And so I'm going to go through the 7 nights, who is featured that night, what emotional attribute they take on, they epitomize, and what we learn from their life, and how we can then take that and make practical application of what we need to do so that we can bond with our Heavenly Father. Think about, it's very natural for a parent to have a child, and when you see your child taking after you in some way, finding pleasure in the same things that you find pleasure in, like my daughter and her daughter, they both love horseback riding. And so whether it's, soccer, playing chess, being a stand-up comedian, whatever it is that you find pleasure in, it's like doubling your pleasure, because now you have someone, your child also likes it, and it's a way for the two of you to bond. And it makes me think of a really, one of my favorite movie scenes is when there's this guy named Johnny and his girlfriend is Baby, and they're at this summer camp, and they've been practicing this dance, and it's the last night of camp, and they're doing their performance, and her parents are in the audience, and her mother just kind of leans over to her dad, and she says, "Oh, she gets that from me." So it's very natural that parents want to see their children following in their footsteps and having these ways that we can bond. And so our Heavenly Father created the world, and He made mankind in His image. So what we're talking about is His emotional attributes. He created the world with 7 emotional attributes, and when He sees us imitating Him and acting like Him and taking on these attributes, then He can look down and go, "Oh, they get that from me." So that's how we bond with our Heavenly Father. And so there's 7 nights of Sukkot. There's 7 shepherds that come to visit us. There's 7 emotional characteristics, and each of the 7 shepherds really epitomizes this, kind of like the poster child for that character trait. And then there's also 7 universal laws that go with each one of those characteristics, because if we don't automatically take on God's characteristics, we have free choice. So you see, especially when we're reading about mankind in the beginning generations, we see that there was some that were called righteous and some that were called wicked. So when we take on the emotional traits of our Heavenly Father, then that's the definition of righteous. Like Noah was called righteous, and Enoch walked with God and he was called righteous, and Abraham, of course, was righteous. But then we see like Sodom and Gomorrah was wicked. And so we have to look at, well, what did you do to get God's definition of wicked, and what do you do to be called righteous? So when we take on God's characteristics, we bond with Him, we become righteous, it gives Him pleasure, it gives us pleasure, because everything that He tells us to do is the true pleasure in life. It's what life is all about. But when we choose to pervert what He says to do, then we have wickedness, and then we are not bonding with God. And so the first emotional attribute that God created the world with is something in Hebrew called hesed, and it means loving kindness. And Abraham was the walking, talking, breathing example of loving kindness. His whole journey of faith was a blessing to others. So we need to make a practical application of that. And what we need to do this first night of Sukkot, when our 7 visitors come, and we're highlighting Abraham, and we're highlighting hesed, loving kindness, the practical application of that is 2 things. First of all, we want to transform ourselves from being takers to givers. In every relationship that we find ourselves in, at home, at work, with our friends, we always want to be thinking about being a giver, not a what about me person or a narcissist type person. It reminds me of a funny story of this college girl that was, she didn't have many friends. She really wasn't a nice person. She went to a psychotherapist and she told him all about her experiences, and he diagnosed her to be a narcissist. He said, "You're a very selfish person, you're a narcissist." And she was very worried about that. She thought, well, nobody's going to want to marry me. I'm never going to have kids. What do I do? This is horrible. I've been diagnosed as a narcissist. So someone told her to go talk to the Rebbe. She wrote this long letter to the Rebbe explaining to him all of her problems and all of her traits, and how she was very selfish. And so then she went to see him, and she saw him, and she said, "Well, did you read my letter?" And he said, "Yes." And he says, "I see that you're a college student." He said, "Do you eat in the cafeteria?" And she's like, "Yeah, what does that have to do with anything?" And he says, "Well, when you're in the cafeteria and you get up to get yourself something, see if anybody else around you needs something. Do they need a napkin? Do they need salt? Do they need water? Whatever it is, start looking at the people around you, wherever you find yourself, and ask them if you can do anything for them." And she said, "Well, Rebbe, did you read my letter? I've been diagnosed as a narcissist. I'm very selfish." He said, "Just do this." So she went, and she started slowly. People around her started to see her differently. She was the one who was always looking to see, what can I do for you? She became a giver. She was asked out on dates. She got married. She had children. So this is the first thing we need to do. We always need to be looking in our relationships at ways that we can become a giver. And this is what Abraham epitomized. The second thing is that we need to look and see, what is our unique gift? Because we're all unique individuals. Some people are very good at making money. They can give money. Charity is always needed. Some people are good listeners. You can give to others by just listening and empathetic listening, to somebody. You can just show respect to people. That's giving emotionally. Show respect to the cashier, to the bus driver, and give to them emotionally. You can give intellectually if you have some knowledge about a certain thing. Share your knowledge. So there's all different ways that we can give. Abraham and Sarah, They were the ones that spent their life teaching monotheism to the world, teaching everybody. They were really revolutionaries in their day, because when the time that they lived, everybody had so many gods, small g, gods for everything. And so Abraham and Sarah were teaching about the one true God. Abraham was also the first person recorded to pray for the sick. He prayed for Abimelech to be healed. So that's another way of giving, praying for the sick, visiting the sick. There's all kinds of ways. So, okay, so you see in Abraham's day, his contemporaries were Sodom and Gomorrah, and he even gave to them by pleading with God, well, what if there's 40 righteous people? What if there's 30 righteous people? He was trying to go to bat for them so that God wouldn't destroy the cities. And so you see that Sodom and Gomorrah, they took God's emotional attribute of hesed, of loving kindness, and they perverted it. And what do you do when you pervert one of God's attributes? You have a need for a universal law, a thou shalt not. And this one goes with thou shalt not commit adultery, because when you take loving kindness and you pervert it, you get sexual sins. And this is what was going on with Abraham's contemporaries. So we see someone making the choice to imitate God, do Abraham, like when we have Abraham's name up here on the sukkah, we have a big tent that's open. He was hospitable. That's another way we can give. We can have people, we can give food, we can serve people in our homes, we can offer them a place to sleep. There's so many ways we can give. So just to recap, for this first night of Sukkot, the featured guest is Abraham. The featured characteristic of our Heavenly Father is loving kindness, which is hesed. And then the practical ways that we can bring hesed and loving kindness into our lives is to always be thinking, in every situation you find yourself in, how can I be a giver? And then also, number two, is to what are your unique gifts? What can you give to the world? Like Abraham gave his hospitality, he gave his knowledge of the one true God, and prayed for the sick. Abraham was a giver. All right, so every night we're going to do this 7 times, and I'm going to tell you who the featured shepherd is, what characteristic they epitomize, practical applications of that, then what the universal law is. That would be the perversion of that attribute and the need for a thou shalt not law. So I hope you're going to enjoy this. This is going to be, it's called 7 Keys to Bonding with God. And so this was key 1, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.